Hello, my name is Stephen Niederstein, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. Thank you for joining me as we do another installment of our journey here on this channel. We just finished up the third chapter from Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount. The chapter was titled As a Man Thinketh. A lot of great stuff from that, a lot of great feedback, and I appreciate y'all's input from it. I really do. It's been a life-changing book for me, so it was really cool to be able to share another section of it with you. But that brings us to the next part that we're going to be doing. I'm excited about this because it's different from the normal authors. It goes back to the Oxford group again, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the four absolutes. So should definitely be interesting. I do want to thank everybody that follows along, that subscribes to the YouTube and likes and comments and shares, and then the Facebook, the Instagram, whatever platform you're following me on. I greatly appreciate it. It's really cool to see this thing grow and mature and get some feedback from y'all as well. It's great to have some participation. So, the book we are going to be reading out of is one I feel very privileged actually to have a copy of it, especially the copy I have. It's called, there is no face to it, but I don't know. It is, What is the Oxford Group? Let me see. Maybe I can open up the cover page for you. Here you go. So you can see it a little bit better. Yeah. What is the Oxford Group? That's where we're going to go, or what we're going to be reading out of. Okay. And it's by the layman with a notebook. I do believe you can go find the originating author for it if you Google and search enough. But I didn't want to do that. I like to keep it anonymous, which is the purpose of why they did this too. This book was published in 1933. This is a first edition of the book, and this was first printed in December 1933. Actually, I really enjoyed this copy because it was signed. You might be able. Can't tell. I'm trying to get it in, but it's got a signature, October 30th, 1934, by a James Whitcomb Burroughs in the Tremont Temple in Boston, Massachusetts. And he was actually a very popular priest or a pastor, and he actually has a book written that I've been meaning to buy and read, along with the other stacks of books that I have. So one thing at a time, right? So that's what we're going to be reading out of today. It's the book called What is the Oxford Group? And within this book, is pretty much the entire program of the Oxford Group. What it is, a chapter on sin, a chapter sharing for confession and witness, surrender, restitution, guidance, and then there's a section on each absolute. The absolutes, by the way, are absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. So, what we're going to be doing today we're going to read the first time they introduce these principles in this book, which will be on page 6. And this is not going to be too much of a deep dive really on this episode. I just wanted to introduce what we're going to be doing. And also I wanted to introduce where they will be coming from. So the four absolutes that we're going to be reading about a little bit today from the What is the Oxford Group actually originated from a different book that someone actually left a comment on one of my old videos. I think it was as I was going through one of the chapters from I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. Someone pointed me in the direction of finding another book. And the book is The Principles of Jesus. I can't really see it. Principles of Jesus. And here you go. Here's the cover page. This was by Robert E. Speers. Now, this was written in 1902, and there's a chapter in here, it's chapter 6, called Jesus and Standards. And turns out the four absolutes, or he listed them as four standards in this book, but we're going to read that chapter 2 as well. Actually, I should probably say. So we're going to start with what is the Oxford Group reading, and we're going to read about 2 pages out of that. And then we're going to read 2 pages from this book, which has Robert Speers' reasoning for these 4 standards, 4 absolutes. And then I'll talk a little bit about them, and then we'll wrap up, and then we'll episodes going forward, we're going to be splitting each one of the absolutes into 2 episodes, I believe. So a lot of good stuff coming forward. I'm really excited about it. So let's get into it. Going to be a lot of reading today. Well, I don't know if a lot's the right word, but more than usual, let's say. So here we go. This is what is the Oxford Group in the first chapter. And we're on page 6. The paragraphs start with the aims. The aims of the Oxford Group are to bring into the world the realization of the power of the Holy Spirit as a force for spiritual and material stability and a betterment of the world, to awaken in us as individuals the knowledge that we are dissipating our spiritual inheritance and that sin is the frustration of God's plan for us all. It sets out to make the world understand that spiritual common sense is of more practical value and use to mankind than any selfish piety or blind paganism. The working beliefs of the group are not misty ideals. They are practical standards within the scope of anyone who will give his or her life, powerful, insignificant, interesting, or prosaic as it may be, in the world to God's absolute keeping. There is no reason why this giving of our lives to God should mean our being pious or religious bores. Neither should it mean that we have to give up our ordinary obligations or duties. It means we surrender to God everything that stands between Him and us. The Oxford Group has 4 points, which are the keys to the kind of spiritual life God wishes us to lead. These points are absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. The average unchanged person on seeing these points or hearing of them asks, but how can I or anyone be absolutely honest or pure or unselfish or loving in a world like this? Jesus Christ kept to these 4 points in their fullness. He was a man without home, possessions, or earthly commitments. The nearer we live to the absolute in these 4 points, the nearer we are to Christ. Whether it means being without a home, possessions, or earthly responsibilities, or are taking on more responsibilities. God knows the zest we put into our fight for life founded on Christ principles. He knows the difficulties of circumstances and the influence of environment that confront the real Christian at every step. Because he can gauge the sincerity of our vision, he does not too harshly condemn our stumbles. We have not the knowledge which would enable us to judge if any man or woman has been able to live a life absolutely as Christ would have him or her live it. But the Oxford Group do know that placing these necessary 4 points for a Christian life as absolute ones in placing Christ as the absolute example to which, by the help of God, we can aspire. The Oxford Group 4 points are the basis of beauty of thought, word, and deed. They may not be so unattainable as we may suppose, but very few can or have ever lived lives of absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, St. Paul tells us. It is doubtful if even a mystic giving up his life to pious contemplation lives a life founded on these 4 points in their fullness. It is a matter of argument whether his shutting himself away from human contact is absolute love for his fellow men, It certainly seems to the uninitiated to be selflessness in a negative form. The saints of this world, past and present, are those who will still leading a helpful material life for other people, fight relentless warfare against their own temptations and the dire results of sin in other people. They are the St. Georges who persistently strive to kill the dragon of sin, which will not lie down and die gracefully. Daily they are singed by the fiery breath from the dragon's devouring jaws, crushed to earth by its huge, unwieldy body. But they rise again, pick up the sword of a Christian life dropped when they fell into sin, and by God's grace forgiven their fall. They commence once again their fight for absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. So that is the introduction of the four absolutes and their reasoning for doing them, because they believe that's the Christ ideal that they want to pursue, right? And they believe that is the way to maintaining those principles, should you falter, is the way to allow God to work through you to the best of his ability, and for us to be out of the way as much as possible. And I like this line it said there: the Oxford group 4 points are the basis of beauty of thought, word, and deed. Right? We've talked about that a lot. It's more than just the actions you take. It's the words you say. It's the thoughts you think and thoughts you entertain. Right? That's a lot of what Emmett Fox talks about. It's more than just the actions. Eventually you have to move behind that to the words, but also the thoughts, and then also the intention, the belief, right? Where's it coming from? So that's the Oxford group's introduction of the four absolutes. And I do want to just, for some depth and context, read from this book here. Again, this is The Principles of Jesus. We're going to read chapter 6 out of this book, and it's the 6th chapter is titled Jesus and Standards. Okay, so here we go. 1. Jesus did not attempt to issue. Excuse me, I wanted to just check something real quick. Yeah. I'm not going to read those numbers. No, I will, I guess, because it goes throughout the whole thing. Each paragraph is numbered. So I'll read it, each one, so you know which paragraph to follow along with if you got this book. So, yeah, chapter 6, Jesus and Standards, from Robert Speers, The Principles of Jesus. 1. Jesus did not attempt to issue a code of laws to guide human conduct. He put men in possession of great moral principles, which they would have to apply themselves. He did not outline, for example, the duties of Christians to one another in the church. He specified some of them. What, for example? But only a few. His new commandment contained a principle which would solve all. John 13:34 and 35. It might seem from Jesus' teaching that he was not doing this, but rather dealing with points of application, of principle to practice. He was so practical and illustrative, Matthew 5:39 through 42. But he taught in this way in order to make people understand, and the illustrations he used were themselves such as to make some principle perfectly clear. They set up standards. Mark 9:33, Matthew 5:34, 37, 6:13, or Matthew 6, verse 13, Mark 7, verse 15, Luke 9, verse 60. 3. And these standards were absolute. There we go. There's the absolute word, right? So Jesus teaches by principle and application of the principle. And these were absolute. The more boldly absolute, because Jesus intentionally framed his teaching in direct opposition to the causatical method of the scribes. They explained the law by applying it to special cases and by quibbling and fine distinctions showed how far a man could go in violating the spirit of the command without violating its letter. Jesus explained by application also. Only he chose sharp and exacting cases, and by declaring that the principle held in these showed that it held everywhere. He cut off escapes and pretexts and taught that standards are standards, right? So he's saying people try to get away with and find loopholes in the law, but a absolute standard cannot have any wiggle room. Men say, I think this course is right. My conscience does not reprove me, therefore it is right for me. Nonsense. Jesus told his disciples that someday men would kill them consciously and for God's sake. I don't think it's that word is consciously, but I can't wrap around it right now. John 16:2. He pointed out that there is such a thing as moral colorblindness. Matthew 6:23. He did not accuse the teachers of Israel of dishonesty, but he said they were wrong. They had taught conscientiously, but they had not set out his principles. Okay, so Jesus told his disciples that someday men would kill them conscientiously and for God's sake. Interesting. And the end of that paragraph referenced Matthew 5:33, 34, 38, 39, 43, and 44. Paragraph 5. Jesus was then the teacher of absolute principles. He made no comparisons, no abatements for human lust or weakness. Perfection was his standard. Matthew 5, verse 48. He had attained it. John 8, verse 29. He demanded it. We are to be his disciples in this. Right is to be right. Thinking it right or thinking it wrong does not make a thing right or wrong. It is right or wrong, irrespective of our thought about it. To know whether it is right or wrong, drag it into Jesus' presence and see how he looks at it and how it looks before him. Look out for number 1 is an accredited human maxim. But the words of Christ can you find? But what words of Christ can you find, and what acts of Christ that utterly condemn it? 6. Jesus set up an absolute standard of truth. Find all his allusions to lies. If Satan is the father of lies, how can any lie be justifiable? Jesus did not make truthfulness depend upon its profitableness or its loss. Men must be true and speak the truth regardless of consequences. I'm going to read that again. Men must be true and speak the truth regardless of consequences. 7. Jesus set up an absolute standard of unselfishness. This is the second one. This was his own spirit. Mark 10:45, Luke 22:27. The incarnation was the great self-emptying. Philippians 2:7. The kingdom with its service of God and man was to be above home, friends, comfort, life. Luke 14, verse 33, Matthew 19, verse 29. He made no room for reservations. 8. Jesus set up an absolute standard of purity. Third one. He tolerated no uncleanliness whatsoever. The inner chambers of imagery and desire must be pure. A hand or an eye, outer or inner sin, must be sacrificed to the claims of the kingdom of heaven. Paragraph 9. Jesus set up the absolute standard of love. John 3:34. Neither dirt, Luke 16:20, nor poverty, Luke 14:13, nor social inferiority, Luke 7:39, were annulments of the law of love. He himself loved to the limit, John 13:1, and no abatement, and with no abatements. The law of love makes it impossible to say, I don't like those people. I can't love them. Jesus himself was the standard he set up. He was unchangeable. He had been before Abraham. John 8:58. He would be forever. Hebrews 13:8. The absolute teacher was the absolute lesson. It is a great thing in this day of wavering, of quibbling by moral evasions and straddles, to have faith and a faithful master who cannot be moved. Wow. Excuse me. I love that. Holy cow. I've read that a couple of times, but reading it out loud and just... we don't get wiggle room. There's not... and I love how that was written in 1902. Right? Well, the Bible was written thousands of years ago, right? But this book specifically was written, and he talked to that last line there, talks about, it's like he was talking about it today. In this is a great thing in this day of wavering, of quibbling by moral evasions and straddles, who have a faith and faithful master who cannot be moved. He was unchangeable. They said Jesus was unchangeable, right? So that is what set the standard for these absolutes. I do want to say that he directly referenced the absolute standard of purity, the absolute standard of unselfishness, and the absolute standard of love. I find it interesting, actually, and this is we're going into my opinion here. The Oxford group changed his analysis of the fourth standard from absolute truth to absolute honesty, which I find very interesting, because to many those are the same thing, but when you really break them down, they're not. Absolute truth is absolute spiritual truth, absolute truth of circumstance, right? But I know from my personal experience that absolute truth was impossible for me to find. I was so delusional. I was just so my reality was so distorted by the spiritual sickness I had inside of myself. I could not tell you what the truth actually was. I would swear to you I knew it. I would swear to you this. I would give you a version of it, but it wasn't the actual truth. The only way I could get to truth was to pour out honestly everything within me and in my mind to another human being and a God of my understanding, right? When we're talking about 12-step recovery, right? That's a fifth step, right? In some capacities, at least. And in the Oxford group teachings, that's the confession is a principle. And but I had to get this out of me to get clarity and back down to the absolute truth of the situation. I couldn't speak to absolute truth. So I believe it appropriate, and maybe I'm making something out of nothing, I understand that, but to say absolute honesty when because the Oxford group wasn't around because everyone was well. The Oxford group was around to help people with spiritual sickness. Now, the Oxford group was not solely focused on drunks. Honestly, the story goes that they got sick of trying to help drunks because we're belligerent, arrogant people. Fair, right? Anyone with substance use usually has an ego to go along with it. But the Oxford group was trying to help people improve their spiritual living. Now, that includes those who suffered from alcoholism and drug addiction, even back then. That includes people that were unfaithful to their wives, people that were terrible with money, people that were horrifically depressed, people that were fearful and anxious. Could be anything where a spiritual sickness could develop, right? A problem with gambling, violence, anger, whatever it might be, right? So the Oxford group wasn't solely focused on one lane of spiritual sickness, right? The 12-step the original 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous, and later and Narcotics Anonymous. Those are very more focused into substance use, though there is a spin-offs for every type of spiritual sickness now that off of a 12-step group. But the Oxford group was just giving a place for spiritual realignment and growth. So if you're coming in spiritually sick, though, you might not know what truth is, just like I didn't. So the only thing you can do is just actually be honest about the thoughts you're having and the desires you have and the things going on in your life. And when you do that, you can discern what the truth is. So it's almost that the absolute honesty piece is more applicable, because if I was told I had to be absolutely truthful with everything I would say, I don't even know if I would have talked, because I don't know what that means. I definitely wouldn't have given the truth. I didn't even know what spiritual truth meant. I didn't know what absolute truth meant. I knew honesty was something I avoided like the plague, because I didn't want people to get to know me, because I didn't want people to reject me. I didn't want people to know the insanity that was going on in here. But people gave me the space to actually take that on. People gave me the space to actually grow and process all of that and get all of the insanity in my brain out of me. And when they did that, they pieced through it and they found the truth. They helped me shift my perspective and see the truth, right? I was blinded to the truth. So to use absolute honesty in that place is, I think was a great step to take the purity, the unselfishness, the love, and then put in honesty, because honesty brings you to the truth or gives the opportunity to. So, great to read that. And I love how he explained, Spear put it so just clearly, at least to me, and that the real problem was that Jesus didn't set laws. He gave principles to practice. It's not this written out thing, act this, or don't do this thing, right? It's act this way, behave in this way, because if I say I always have to be honest, there's no wiggle room to justify a lie, right? So many people justify lies. So many people think it's okay to distort and twist the truth. And this just gets taken out at the knees. This absolute honesty piece dictates your behavior, not confines it. It dictates it. It's a very big difference. We talked about this with Emmett Fox. We've talked about this with James Allen, right? This is one of a founding set of principles, right? Like, dictate how you would like to be and be that way. When he said, when Spears said he was unchangeable, right? That's where the strength came in, right? That's where we get to start to have some strength too, is we get to practice these principles, in the case of the Oxford group, these 4 absolutes in our daily lives, and then trust the outcome to the God of our understanding. Now, this will be another very Christian-oriented section of these readings, but the reality of it is, this applies to everything. This applies to every type of spiritual practice, every type of spiritual journey, every type of spiritual connection, right? So please don't get lost in the verbiage. Allow yourself to actually be able to engage in the principles we're going to be talking about and the practices we're going to be talking about here too. So, and all of them were just so good. And just how to give of ourselves and to be clean, not only on the outside, but on the inside, and to really be directive of these things. It's just fantastic. I've read a good chunk of this book. I've got, I think, a third left to finish it. But if you really want to look into some teachings on an application of principles, this book is fantastic. This The Principles of Jesus. We won't probably reference again in this section. Maybe later on should it become relevant, but it has chapters for Jesus in prayer, Jesus the will of God, Jesus in standards is the one we just read, then Jesus in duty, Jesus in love, Jesus in children, Jesus in poverty, right? So it gives Robert Speers, Jesus in judgment, Jesus in faith, gives a lot of principled education as to the application of the principles of Jesus in these areas of life. And I found them to be illuminating. I found them to be fantastic reads and just ways to grow, perspectives to take and understanding. So give that a shot. But also, I do believe you can get a reprint copy of this, What is the Oxford Group? Highly recommend that, not only just to follow along with these next 8 videos, but to also just read through yourself. If you are in 12-step recovery, getting some of the originating material, it gives you depth and context. At least it has for me. This is one reason I do this podcast, is because through working 12-step programs and getting into recovery and starting a spiritual journey, I was able to actually really grab onto this stuff. And I took deeper looks, right? That's how I found these authors. That's how I found this literature. That's how I found this information. And it's bolstered my spiritual journey. It's bolstered my faith and hope and connection to a God of my understanding. And it's and I encourage anyone to go grab on and just dive in, because you'll find more about you than maybe you're comfortable with. And if you get there, making some progress. So again, this is What is the Oxford Group? We will be doing the 4 absolutes over the next 8 weeks. I'm taking all 4 of them, splitting them up into 2 weeks apiece. And I really am looking forward to diving into this with y'all. So I hope y'all enjoyed this episode today, and I'll be back again next week as we go into absolute honesty. So until next time, thanks.